Hello and welcome to Newsday. Reporting live from Singapore, I'm Steve Lai. The headlines. Israel launches airstrikes on southern Lebanon as Hezbollah's leader vows punishment after a wave of explosive device attacks killed dozens of people. The BBC reveals the former boss of the luxury department store Harrods, the late Mohammed Al-Fayed, has been accused of rape by 5 female ex-employees. A team of scientists say it's beyond reasonable doubt the COVID pandemic started with infected animals sold at a market rather than a laboratory leak. Can China play a peace-brokering role in Myanmar's ongoing civil war? We have a special report from the Chinese border with Myanmar. And as polls show Kamala Harris and Donald Trump neck and neck in the US presidential race, we're in Michigan, one of the crucial swing states. We start in the Middle East, where Israel has launched fresh airstrikes in southern Lebanon in what security sources there say is some of the most intense bombing since the start of the Gaza war in October. Now, these are the latest pictures of Israeli strikes on the southern Lebanese border village of Rihan. It all comes as the leader of Hezbollah, a proscribed terrorist organization by some Western governments, was giving his first public reaction to the wave of attacks across Lebanon. At least 37 people have been killed and thousands injured by exploding pagers and walkie-talkies. Hassan Nasrallah described the attacks as a massacre and said it could be called a declaration of war. Our chief international correspondent, Orla Gurin, has this report.
Israeli fighter jets swooping low over Beirut this afternoon, dominating the skies and sending a message to Hassan Nasrallah. Breaking the sound barrier as the Hezbollah leader was making a televised address. That's something Israel likes to do. And before he spoke today, a wave of Israeli attacks in southern Lebanon, perhaps the heaviest since the Gaza war began. This footage appears to show some of the latest strikes. Israel says it was targeting rocket launchers. Hassan Nasrallah said today that Israel had dealt a major military blow with attacks on Tuesday and Wednesday. The enemy, he said, had crossed all red lines. First, it was pagers exploding. Then walkie-talkies blowing up at funerals. Hezbollah's communication system may have been the target, but a Lebanese minister told us the attacks, widely blamed on Israel, break international law. Minister, are you saying that these attacks are a war crime?
I think they are. I think that the whole world could see that these attacks occurred in markets, they occurred in hospitals, they occurred in people driving their cars. These were not people who were at the battleground fighting.
In its stronghold in South Beirut, Hezbollah is still mourning its dead, killed on and off the battlefield. They are getting ready here now for the funeral of another fighter. Hezbollah has been hit hard this week, not just in terms of the dead and the wounded, but the attack on its communication systems was a major humiliation. There's anger here and there's uncertainty. Many are wondering what might come next. Hajim Miriam said, "We can expect anything from Israel, but we are prepared, both men and women." As for the wounded, she said, "We pray God will heal them. I would donate my own eyes for all of those who lost theirs." So far, it appears those killed this week were foot soldiers in Hezbollah, which is classed as a terrorist organisation by the UK and the US. Hassan Nasrallah says the enemy has declared war. and Hezbollah won't stop until Israel does. Orla Gearan, BBC News, Beirut.
And to get some understanding of what's been going on in the last 48 hours there, I'm joined by Alam Saleh, Senior Lecturer in Iranian Studies at the Centre for Arab and Islamic Studies at the Australian National University. Thank you for joining me this hour. I want to start with your reaction to the last 48 hours where we've seen both those pager and walkie-talkie attacks.
Well, the operation, for sure, has been very effective. It's been very sophisticated, and it shows that Israel has a technological superiority over its enemies in the region. For sure, in terms of intelligence, it has been quite successful and well coordinated. However, the key question remains to be answered is to what extent this operation helps Israel strategically to deal with its security challenges in the region. Some of these key challenges and threats are structural and cannot be resolved by the act of sabotage and or assassinations in Syria, in Lebanon, and or in Iran. Indeed, Israel needs a clear and well-planned strategy to get rid of key security challenges that are surrounding it, from Gaza to Hezbollah into Syria, Yemen, and even Iraq and Iran, of course. So I would argue that such operation will only put Israel under further pressure, will never vanish Hezbollah and its allies in the region, and indeed Israel would put Israel under a tremendous amount of pressure in the future. For instance, Prime Minister Netanyahu promised that Israeli citizens will return to their hometown in the northern part of Israel. However, now it would be quite difficult to imagine that they will return under such circumstances. Hezbollah will definitely sooner or later start further operations against homes and towns and villages in the northern part of Israel.
Yeah, so you're saying that Israel is looking to pursue its objectives through military might, and that ultimately will not be successful because it will just draw more retaliation from those parties you were talking about, but whether they be Hezbollah or Hamas or even Iran.
Yes, of course. In the past 20 years or so, we have witnessed in the Middle East that the military forces using military means will not solve the problem. Israel needs to reconsider its policies, particularly with Palestinians, in order to somehow to reduce the tension, to reduce these security issues that is facing. Iran has shown that they are determined to attack Israel when needed, and they are supporting some of the key non-state militias and actors in the region, such as Hezbollah, Hashd al-Shabi, and the Houthis in Yemen, that in the long term would undermine the Israeli security for sure. And Israel cannot afford a long-term and frustrating a war in the region. The tension is not helping Israel, and I would say perhaps Tel Aviv hopes that such rise of tension would get United States involved in this war, something that Washington has declined so far and has shown the very little willingness to get involved, and they are very reluctant to get involved in a war we have seen in the past 11 months or so.
Alam, we'll leave it there for now. Thanks so much for your time today. We do appreciate your thoughts. Alam Saleh, Senior Lecturer in Iranian Studies at the Centre for Arab and Islamic Studies at the Australian National University. Now to the UK, where more women have contacted the BBC saying they were assaulted by the late Mohammed Al Fayed when he was the boss of Harrods. And more than 20 women who worked for him have already come forward as part of a BBC investigation accusing the Egyptian billionaire, who died last year, of multiple counts of rape and attempted rape during his 25-year reign at Harrods. And many claim that during that time, the company helped cover up allegations of abuse. Our correspondent, Helena Wilkinson, has this report and a warning that it contains descriptions of sexual violence.
He tried to rape me more than once.
And he pushed me in and onto the bed so that I couldn't move.
You know, he was 79, nearly 80, and I was 15.
When Mohammed Al Fayed took over Harrods, he quickly embraced his high-profile role and the status that came with it. To his customers and the celebrity guests, he was all charm. But to many of his female employees, he was a different man, a predator. We've heard testimony from more than 20 of Al Fayed's female ex-employees.
I think Mohammed Al Fayed is a rapist. I think he's a serial rapist.
Gemma worked as Al Fayed's personal assistant for 2 years.
Just didn't know which way to turn, so I bought a small dictaphone that I had in my pocket, and these are the transcripts from those recordings. One of them was in Paris, in his residence there, Villa Windsor. I said, I just want to go to sleep on my own. Mr. Fayed, I don't want to, Mr. Fayed. And he kept saying, relax, please relax.
Not long after this incident, Gemma says Al Fayed raped her. In 2009, Gemma contacted a lawyer who told Harrods she was leaving her job on the grounds of sexual harassment. She didn't feel able to disclose the more serious allegations at the time. They agreed to pay a settlement if she signed a non-disclosure agreement. There was also one other condition. Material was to be destroyed.
It was shredded in front of us, including tapes I had of him. Someone from HR was present for the shredding of all of the evidence I had. I thought I'd lost the transcripts, but actually what I did have was the transcriptions sent to my lawyer in my sent items of my email account.
In a statement, the current owners of Harrods said that they'd watched the documentary and expressed sympathy to the victims. Earlier today, they said they were utterly appalled at the allegations and said that employees who were his victims had been failed, for which they sincerely apologised. They also said that the Harrods of today is a very different organisation to the one controlled and owned by Al Fayed. Since this morning, the BBC has been contacted by other former employees who allege they too were attacked by Al Fayed. This woman, who wanted to remain anonymous, we are calling Melanie.
I was sexually assaulted by being groped by Al Fayed at his Park Lane apartment. It was late in 2007.
At the time, Melanie was in her 20s and in her first job. Last year, she told the police.
The police then told me that they had intended to arrest him. They had enough evidence. They couldn't because he was unwell.
Tonight, the Metropolitan Police said they were aware of various allegations of sexual offences made over a number of years. Each one was investigated and no charges resulted. There were several attempts to expose Al Fayed before his death, but it is only now that many of the survivors feel able to speak publicly about the abuse they experienced. Helena Wilkinson, BBC News.
Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. A team of scientists say it is beyond reasonable doubt the COVID pandemic started with infected animals sold at a market rather than a laboratory leak. And they were analysing hundreds of samples collected from Wuhan, China in January of 2020. Now, I've been speaking to one of those researchers, Professor Michael Warby, from the University of Arizona, and he explained what his team had uncovered.
The data that we're looking at here was from samples collected the day that this market, the Huanan seafood market, was closed down at the beginning of the pandemic, 1st of January 2020. The scientists from the Chinese CDC swabbed surfaces from all over this market, floors, walls, cages, carts. And what we're looking at now is the data that they generated from that when they asked, not specifically is SARS-CoV-2 there, but let's sequence the heck out of all of the DNA and RNA in each sample and just see what's there. And when you do that, you can start to see what potential host species were definitely there.
And how cooperative were Chinese authorities when it came to this research?
Well, they've shared the data on public databases that anyone around the world can access, and that is great because it allows teams to take slightly different looks at the data. And so we've done things like going right down to the population level, genetic diversity of the raccoon dogs were there to show that there were many populations, probably from different parts of China, that were part of the supply chain at the market.
And how can you be so confident then that this data is accurate, that you've been working or basing your research on?
Yeah, the data itself, when you look at real data like this, you see, bacteria, plants, fungi, animals, and viruses. And so, for example, we looked at other viruses that were present there and saw obscure wildlife viruses from bamboo rats from southern China, and so it has all the hallmarks of being real data. We don't really have any doubts about that.
Now, China has fortified its border with Myanmar by building higher walls and holding military drills as the civil war on its doorstep threatens its investments and its economy. Armed ethnic groups in Myanmar have made significant gains, capturing key cities and towns on the main road to China, which some believe could be a turning point in the war. Our China correspondent Laura Bicker has this report from the Chinese border.
For families with the right paperwork, the Chinese city of Ruili has become a safe haven. The few that make it through from Myanmar with their precious blue and red work passes are searching for peace and have hopes of prosperity. Cross-border traders try to sell goods from their homeland, but it's hard to make a living in a city where so many are just glad to be alive.
What's happening in Myanmar right now is really, really cruel. I don't know when things can start to improve. I hope some decent people can tell our sides to stop fighting, so the ordinary people can suffer less. Otherwise, it's really tragic for us. The bomb shells hit hospitals. People were killed, including women giving birth there.
Another border checkpoint. China fortified this once porous border during the pandemic. But higher walls can't protect it from Myanmar's brutal civil war. In the last 2 months, armed insurgents have stepped up their fight against the military regime. A Beijing-brokered ceasefire was ripped apart. Thousands have fled the fighting. Much of the land you see behind me, these vast swathes of northern Myanmar, are no longer ruled by the country's military regime. Instead, they've been taken by armed ethnic groups who also control major ports and major cities. Now, this is a critically important trade route to China, which is now having to grapple with this conflict on its doorstep. It is the only major country with the power, with the influence to help end this crisis in Myanmar. China is holding regular military exercises along the border. State media said this is to maintain order. There's also been a flurry of diplomacy to push Myanmar's rulers to hold promised elections. Nothing looks open. Strict COVID lockdowns ravaged Railey's economy. Beijing desperately needs stability to restart trade. Many lives depend on it. After long shifts making car parts and clothes, these Burmese workers can relax. They've been brought from Myanmar as cheap labour for Chinese factories.
There is nothing we can do because war is happening in Myanmar. Everything is expensive. Everywhere there is a battle going on, and everyone has to run because of war.
Their work here comes with conditions. Their movements are often restricted. And while their future is in Chinese hands, Beijing will be considering how big a part it's willing to play in the fate of their homeland. Laura Bicker, BBC News, Rayleigh.
Now, the polls for the US presidential election show the race is still too close to call. So to try and win over undecided and marginal voters, both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are crisscrossing the battleground states. One of those states is Michigan, and my colleague Katrina Perry has been speaking to voters there.
Welcome to Saginaw in Michigan. This is up the north part of the state, and in this swing city, in the swing county, in this battleground state, only 300 votes separated Joe Biden from Donald Trump in 2020. So that gives you an idea about just how tight some of these communities are. You'll see streets where one house has a Kamala Harris sign in it and their next door neighbour has a Donald Trump sign in their front garden. So it's very close, very tight. People reporting issues here and in the other cities we've been in Michigan, just like we're hearing right across America. We're hearing about the economy, we're hearing about the cost of living, an affordability crisis. We're hearing about the rates of inflation, housing, education, immigration, the lack of good quality jobs as people see it. But of course, in one part of Michigan, Dearborn, just outside Detroit, that's home to the biggest Arab American and Muslim American community in this country. And for them, those voters are concerned about all of those issues I just mentioned. But top of the agenda is the situation in the Middle East. They're very concerned about the US policy towards supporting Israel, what they're seeing in Gaza, what they're seeing this week in Lebanon. Many of the voters we spoke to were Lebanese American, had either lived there themselves or their parents or grandparents had immigrated from there, and they're watching those scenes on the television, telling us stories about their own family members who had been caught up in those device explosions a little earlier in the week, and how angry they feel about the situation in this country. We can have a listen to some of what some local businesswomen told me.
It's heartbreaking, just knowing that our tax money and our hard work is helping fund this.
I have somebody that's claiming to be a Democrat, somebody that's claiming to be a Republican, and they're parroting the exact same platforms.
The thought of voting for someone who's directly contributing, right now, directly contributing to the death and destruction of our home country and of our relatives overseas. I've made the decision to vote for Jill Stein. And I know that there are people who will say, you know, it's a wasted vote.
Trump, he's offering to stop the war, so during his 4 years of presidency, we haven't experienced any wars. And the economy was booming, actually.
Now, many of those we spoke to in the Arab American and Muslim American community had said they had voted Democrat most of their lives, but now they're reminded not to do that this time around. Such is their upset and disappointment in the Democratic policy. Many of them, as you heard there, don't know how to vote, are choosing not to vote, are voting for Donald Trump. Many telling me as well they plan to vote for Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate. And of course, we saw that news today from the Uncommitted movement, who were those Democratic Party members who in the Democratic primary here in February chose not to vote for Joe Biden, choosing to write uncommitted on their ballot paper. And today they've said they're not endorsing Kamala Harris. They feel they can't, as I say, because of that policy. But you crisscross through this state, as we have talking to voters, you really do get that sense of a mixed picture. The other thing you see There's many appearances from the candidates. Kamala Harris is here today. Donald Trump was in Flint, Michigan just a couple of days ago. This week as well, the two vice presidential candidates, J.D. Vance and Tim Walz, have been here in the state of Michigan as well, because they know the margins are really tight in this state. A personal appearance could be something that tips an undecided voter into your camp. And this state could be a state that either candidate needs to take them on to the White House. So we'll keep a close eye on what happens here as part of our Voters' Voices series over the next few weeks.
Yeah, the coverage of the US election will be quite extensive over the next 47 days to the US election on the 5th of November. Now, we're going to stay in the US and give you a bit of baseball news for you, because Japan's Shohei Ohtani has made MLB history. He's become the first player to hit 50 home runs and steal more than 50 bases in a single season. The LA Dodgers slugger completed the feat against the Miami Marlins. Now, baseball has a huge following in Japan, and he's become one of the biggest stars in the game. Showtime certainly doing well over there in the US. Thanks for your company here on Newsday. I'll be back with Business Today in a few minutes. Bye.
Live from Singapore, now on BBC News Business Today.
The US Federal Reserve's move to cut interest rates is cheered by President Biden and Wall Street. While here in Singapore, we are gearing up for F1 weekend. We'll look at the economics behind the race. Hello and welcome to Business Today with me, Steve Lai. Now we begin in the United States, where President Joe Biden has responded to the Federal Reserve's move to lower interest rates. He says the world's largest economy has entered a new phase of economic recovery, in a wide-ranging speech promoting his administration's policies to bring down inflation.
So let's be clear. The Fed lowering interest rates isn't a declaration of victory. It's a declaration of progress. It's a signal we've entered a new phase of our economy and our recovery. You know, I believe in the importance for the country to recognize this progress because if we don't, the progress we made will remain locked in the fear of negative mindset that dominated our economic outlook since the pandemic began.
Investors have also cheered the Federal Reserve's rate cut. U.S. stock markets jumped on Thursday, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average and S&P 500 rising to new all-time highs. The BBC's Ritika Gupta has more from New York.
US stocks reached a fresh record high on Thursday, a day after the Federal Reserve kicked off its easing cycle. The S&P 500 rose 1.7%, extending this year's gains to 20%. Meanwhile, the Dow surged over 500 points, topping 42,000 for the first time. The majority of industry groups closed out the session higher. Big tech shares outperformed as the 50 basis point rate cut spurred investors to return to a risk-on mood. Nvidia and Tesla gained 4% and more than 7%, respectively. Stocks that are traditionally tied to economic growth also jumped. Financial giant JP Morgan Chase, industrial stock Caterpillar and Home Depot all saw gains. Better than expected jobless claims data added to the optimism on Thursday, suggesting the labour market remains healthy despite a slowdown in hiring. Wall Street has absorbed Fed Chair Jerome Powell's message that a deep cut in a relatively strong economy will ultimately fend off the risk of recession, and that's reigniting hopes of a soft landing for the economy.
Shares of Nike have jumped by around 8% in after-hours trading after the sportswear giant announced the retirement of its chief executive, John Donohue. He will be replaced by former senior executive Elliott Hill. The leadership change comes as Nike tries to revive sales and battle rising competition. Now, the European Commission and China will intensify efforts to negotiate planned tariffs on made-in-China electric vehicles. This came after a meeting between Chinese Commerce Minister Wang Wentao and Europe's Trade Commissioner in Brussels. It is the latest of Mr. Wang's engagements in Europe. The bloc is yet to vote on the import duty for China-made EVs, which are already subject to a standard 10% tax. Deborah Elms, a trade expert from the Heinrich Foundation, gave us a sense of what lies ahead.
Well, one of the reasons why they have put these tariffs on, or at least proposed tariffs on Chinese EVs, is to give an opportunity and a space for dialogue and discussion and see if they can come to some resolution. If they can't come to a resolution, then the tariffs will be applied. And so I think this is a key step as part of that negotiated process.
And do you think China will be successful at lowering these planned tariffs or removing them altogether?
Probably not, honestly, but at least it gives them an opportunity to have a dialogue about it. And crucially, from the European perspective, may head off retaliatory steps by the Chinese against European products.
So talk us through then the impacts that these tariffs will have, what sort of economic impact they'll have on both the EU and China when it comes to EVs.
Well, they're relatively small. Of course, I say small sitting where I'm not buying an EV, but they're between 8 and 35%, I think, on top of the 10%. So that's not a small number, but it's not 100% tariffs like the Americans and the Canadians have proposed. So I think that there's enough margin on many of the Chinese-made EVs to continue to entice European consumers to buy them. And so I think it will have an impact, but it will not be a sort of catastrophic halt all Chinese EV sales in the EU kind of impact.
And how significant are China's EV sales in Europe? And sort of how important to Europe are they?
Well, that's why we are in a bit of this mess, which is that the European producers are not yet generating enough EVs to meet demand in Europe, particularly if you want to hit net zero. And so Chinese-made EVs is a key part of that strategy. And even for European car manufacturers, many of their production facilities are actually as well in China. So that means that Chinese EVs are part of the solution, most likely, in Europe to a net zero future.
So it does seem that Europe seems to have found itself in a bit of a problem where it wants to move towards a net zero, and it has means to do that by importing Chinese EVs, but at the same time doesn't want to do that.
Well, I think the main problem is that in Europe, car production, whether it's cars or parts, et cetera, is a huge part of the economy. And so if you're going to import cars, then that means that those jobs are at risk. And I think there is the real issue. What are you going to do about jobs in the automotive sector versus your net zero commitments when European manufacturers or manufacturers of EVs in Europe continue to be a pretty small percentage?
Yeah, so how do you see this playing out in the weeks ahead?
Well, we'll have to see how this goes, but I suspect it will be more complicated for a while. And eventually we will have to come to some decision about the importance of net zero pledges versus issues around EVs. And that's not just for the Europeans, it's for the Chinese, the Americans, et cetera.
As the Hollywood award season kicks off, could an artificial intelligence program ever win Best Film? And what would that mean for the movie industry, including its actors, directors, and other creative talent? My colleague, Ben Thompson, has been speaking to the lead negotiator for SAG-AFTRA, the union at the heart of last year's Hollywood's actors' strike.
I would say it's not about whether AI will be used in the business. It is about how AI will be used in the business and what kind of guardrails and limits there are that can be put on it. AI is not implementing itself. Humans are making decisions about how AI is implemented. And so we can decide to do it in a way that is more forward thinking, that cares about its impact on people. But the idea that somehow we're going to block AI, stop it from happening, as much as some people would like that to be the case, that's not possible. And past history of technology, from the invention of electricity to the invention of the internet, have proved that over and over again.
The movie industry is always evolving. There have been developments that are game-changing. Everything from the move from silent movies to the talkies, from black and white to Technicolor. How would you describe the significance of this revolution, AI, in the movie industry?
Each of those developments did, wreak havoc on the industry, and it certainly changed who were the winners and the losers out of that technological advancement. But what's really unique about this moment is this is the first time we've really had the technology that can make it appear as though you have done something that you didn't really do in a very intimate sort of way, and in a close-up and personal sort of way. And I think that has all kinds of implications, not only for people having to compete against themselves for jobs, which is itself horrifying, but also with people having things attributed to them that they didn't agree to or don't want to be part of. And that's not really something we've had to face before.
Here in Singapore, we're gearing up for a busy weekend with the return of the Formula One Grand Prix. The night race is expected to draw more than 250,000 fans, including overseas visitors. Mark Gallagher, a former Jordan Grand Prix and Red Bull racing executive, talked to us about the economics behind the race.
I think there's no question that Singapore has maintained its position as one of the key races in the calendar, and that's partly due to the economic power of Singapore, where it literally resides in the world in terms of being a business hub. And then, of course, the night race aspect of Singapore, which generates a huge global audience because it's evening in Asia, it's Europe, and it's morning in Europe, and the Americas are lunchtime and morning in the Americas. So it has a huge footprint and a very large live audience. And there's no question that it has become well and truly established as one of the must-see Grand Prix for those in the region.
And it's very much a win-win, I suppose. The F1 benefits from having such a unique race, a night race, a street race as it is, and also that Singapore benefits from all the surrounding tourism that comes along board with it.
Yeah, I mean, the economic benefit of the Singapore Grand Prix is an interesting one to consider because, of course, it depends what you measure, because you can measure the tourist benefit, the tourist dollar. You can look at the corporate hospitality guests who come to the race and stay in the five-star hotels. And so that's sort of kind of one set of figures that you can look at. Then there's, I think, a much larger one, which is the benefit of Singapore being in literally the news headlines, the sports news headlines around the world, promoting it as a destination, as a brand, if you like. And there is a huge impact there because it is a highly talked about race. I know that just from personal experience, meeting business people around the world, everyone likes to ask it, and what's the Singapore Grand Prix like? So I think that has advertised Singapore as a destination and sort of promoted its nationhood, if you like.
And if we talk more about Southeast Asia then, or broaden it out, there has been talk that there could be another race in Southeast Asia. What do you think the considerations will be for that?
Yeah, well, we got very close to having a Grand Prix in Vietnam, and that then fell away. We've also looked at Thailand. There's been a big push to have more Grand Prix in the region. I have to say, Singapore is a hard act to follow. Because the bar is very, very high. But there's no doubt that Formula One has been on a roll over the last, since 2017 when Liberty Media acquired Formula One. And they're keen to continue expanding the calendar, particularly in Asia, but also notably in Africa.
That's it for Business Today at this hour. Thanks for watching.
The future is already here.
All about AI changing our jobs.
From gadgets to gaming.
May the best driver win.
it won't be me.
Sustainability to AI.
Giant nets and AI robots to deal with plastic pollution.
The latest developments from the world of tech.
A floating solar farm, and it's a pretty impressive sight.
Wow! That went right through me!
Click on BBC News.
This is BBC News with the latest news and results from around the globe. In sports